Peace and blessings, everyone. Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Gov'T Npo, and we have a packed show for you tonight. We're going to try to answer some very important questions. Is our government becoming too big? Is our economic growth too slow? Are we in danger of losing the quality of our lives? Stay tuned for our financial secretary. He's going to answer these questions, as well as we are going to bring some analysis to you by Mrs. Dana Lewis Ambrose. She's a lecturer at HLSCC in the Department of Business and Computer Studies. Along with her, we're going to have Mr. Troy Christopher. He's the president of the Business Committee of the BVI, Chamber of Commerce and Hotel Association. In our second segment, we're going to have Ms. Carolyn Igwe. She's Deputy Secretary in the Ministry of Health and Social Development, with Ms. Gov'T Npo. She's the Principal Crown Counsel in Attorney General's Office, and Mr. Errol George. He is the Director in the Financial Investigation Agency. And you, along with our guests, are going to be discussing the impact of the Nonprofit Organization Act 2012 and the impact that's going to have on voluntarism. First, we're going to go to our reporter in the field, Sean Rose. He's going to give us an update on the top stories and making the news. Sean, what are the top stories we have making news?
Good evening, Gov'T Npo. Good evening, listeners. Well, there are two stories we'll look at this evening. The first one is that the 1st District Representative, Honorable Andrew Foy, is disclaiming that he is seeking to assume leadership of the Virgin Islands Party. He was speaking on Saturday in Capoons Bay while he was delivering a report to the residents of the 1st District. And during that speech, he suggested that rumors that suggests he's seeking to assume leadership of the party is false. In fact, they are false. And he also suggested that opposition leader Honorable Ralph T. O'Neill has offered to step down within an 18-month time frame. He says that after the last elections in November 2011, Honorable O'Neill, the veteran politician who has been representing the Virgin Islands and in particular 9th District for some 34 years, offered to step down within an 18-month time frame. Now, if we were to do the math, that would take us somewhere around May of this year. He didn't say, though, Honorable Foy didn't say specifically when, whether it will be before May or after May. However, Ralph T. O'Neill, in response to the suggestion presented by the 1st District Representative, has said very little, except to say that he suggested that Honorable Foy didn't give a full disclosure. And it's really left now to find out what's going to happen in the weeks and months to come. But Foy did suggest as well that the leadership of the Virgin Islands Party is dependent on the party's constitution and its 76-member Congress. Did
Honorable Foy give any indication of whether he wanted to get that post, or he was having a desire for that post?
Well, one might suggest that by stating that the process of leadership will be determined by the party's constitution and the 76-member Congress is an indication. However, we can't really make that assumption at this point, except to say, though, that he did inform his district members that he, as a politician, has ambition too. So who knows?
Okay. What else you have for us? The top story. What other top story you have for us?
Well, from our point of view, the Ministry of Communications retreat held at the Treasure Isle Hotel on January 24 is a significant story, because out of that retreat, we are expecting to hear very soon the details in a 10-year strategic plan going forward. The minister said that as part of a 10-year plan, 2013 to 2023, there are a number of initiatives that the ministry will be undertaking, including opportunities to create safer road networks, broadband services in schools throughout the territory, efforts to introduce and improve renewable energy and energy consumption, and also improving the territory's ports from Just Van Dyke to Anegada, a boardwalk in Road Town to help create more opportunities for commerce and options for tourists, additional designated areas for food vendors and other vendors as well, as part of an overall plan to create an economic and a commercial space really in Road Town.
Any new vision or mission, or any admonition to the civil service in that retreat?
No particular disclosures in that regard at this point, Ejurenka, but I'm sure that we're going to hear much more details as we move on in the weeks and months ahead, coming as to exactly what came out of this strategic plan.
All right, that's great. Well, thank you very much for that update, Sean. Interesting things going on in the country, and we look forward to hearing all the details concerning these events in the news ahead. We're going to take a break for a word from our sponsors, and when we come back, the discussion is going to begin concerning some of the questions that we raised earlier. What do you think about our government being big? Is our quality of life being threatened? Is our economy growing too slow? Some things need to be done about these. We're going to answer some of those questions. We're going to hear from the financial secretary in a clip that in a contribution he made to the retreat, the same Ministry of Communication and Works retreat. We're going to hear some of his presentation, and we're going to have a discussion on that with Mrs. Ambrose and Mr. Christopher when we come back on the other side of his break. Keep it locked right here to Spotlight.
This program is sponsored by the law firm of J.S. Archibald & Co. and by the trust company J.S. Archibald Trust Services Limited, both of Roadtown, Tortola, BVI.
Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm Ejurenka, and I'm here with my good friend, Sister Dana Lewis Ambrose, lecturer at HLSCC. Welcome to Spotlight. It's good to see you.
Yes, thank you, Ejurenka, and I believe this is probably the first time you're seeing me for the year, so Happy New Year.
This is true. Happy New Year. Thanks for coming on such short notice too. I appreciate that. And I'm here also with Mr. Troy Christopher, the president of the BVI-CCHA's Business Committee. And he's here, and we're going to have a discussion about, of course, some of those questions raised earlier. Welcome, Troy. Good to see you as usual.
Good evening, viewers. Good to be here.
Yes. What we're going to do is we're going to go to a clip of the financial secretary in his presentation to the retreat that the Ministry of Communication and Work had, I think it was last week. And he made some very important statements concerning the way the country is going, what we need to be conscious of and aware of, and things that we need to do, some of the solutions to the challenges that we begin to face. Let's take a listen and a look at what he had to say.
The government of the Virgin Islands as an institution has outpaced the growth in the government, has outpaced the growth of the economy in the Virgin Islands. In effect, the government of the Virgin Islands is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger when taken in context with the entire economy. When this fact is taken together with the economy of the Virgin Islands, it says that our standard of living as year goes by is becoming increasingly vulnerable to shocks. It suggests as well, because we have a bigger government, which implies bigger relative government, which implies a smaller relative private sector, that in some ways we're losing some of the imagination and innovation that is characteristic of vibrant economies. The solution is twofold to this. And as the Premier stated repeatedly, we must grow the economy so that there will be more taxes to collect and more jobs for people to fill. And on the other hand, he places on us the mandate of efficient effective, transparent, and credible management of the resources that they have allocated to us.
Well, Dana, Troy, you heard the financial secretary. Pretty telling statement. Sounds like there's some challenges ahead. What's your views on what has been said?
Well, anyone who's familiar with the field of economics is familiar with a model called the circular flow diagram, which indicates or states that there are three main stakeholders within any economy. Those being the households, the private sector or the firms, and the government. And therefore there needs to be interaction, continuous interchanges with those three areas or those three stakeholders. If you have one sector or one area that is growing far beyond the others, it will create a problem. Everything must have a balance, and you want to make sure that one sector or one area is not outdoing the others, because then it means that one area or stakeholder perhaps is putting themselves out on a limb, and the other areas are not coming up to speed with what is actually taking place. What I'm basically saying is this: I think the financial secretary is bang on target. The government is playing a very large role within the society. And when you have small developing societies, that is usually the case, because you expect government to take the lead so that there is a maintenance of the standard of living as well as the quality of life. But if a society is to mature and to develop, the other two areas have to come into play and step up to the plate and be working and growing at the same pace with the government.
I wanted to hear Troy's views on that. Are you concurrent with Dana, or you have a slightly different view to that approach, to the whole concept of balance and the pathology that will develop if one segment of the economy or one stakeholder set outpace the other?
Well, I think I agree with Dana to a great extent. Although we know that you would always want your economy to lead, and if that could be the lead, as long as you're not far behind, that would actually be the ideal formula. But I think in his statement, which I think we have to put into context, obviously because he's at a retreat and he's speaking to his management team. These are the top people in the Ministry of Communications, and he is actually, it seems subtle, but he's actually forcefully sounding an alarm to them about the state of the BVI economy and how that relates to what government is doing and what they are going to be doing inside government going forward. And he's identifying that the BVI economy, our two pillars, financial services is the only one really that is continuing to grow. It's had its challenges. I think he quoted in 2009 where we had some issues, obviously globally, but he specifically said that of the times when our economic growth outpaced our expenditure, it was financial services that was the one that did it. And so he's pointing a roadmap in that financial services is continuing to grow, but what is considered to be our other pillar, which is tourism, seems to be lagging very, very far behind. And he is sounding alarm to his group in government that because of this, government's growth is now overpowering the revenues that we are taking in as a country, and he's looking at the road forward and saying a time is going to come when this is going to create a significant problem. And so in this retreat, it seems like this is the context in which they are going to decide, at least from their end. It may not necessarily be their responsibility from his position to necessarily grow the economy or carry out all these different things that has to be done, as he stated, but he wants to make sure that wastage in government and the growth of government in terms of how fast it is growing, that they analyze it, they have great information, they make sure that it's as streamlined as possible.
We have to take a break, but isn't it essential that we have a big government in relationship to our population size and to our economy because of the uniqueness of our economy? It's a small population. The financial services sector and the tourism sector are two economic pillars that require large bureaucracies in order to make them successful. So it's like as if it's the more financial services you get, the more people you need to process the financial services. So naturally, government will grow. Is it the fault of the economy or some growth in the economy that government is growing, or it's just that the administrations or subsequent governments don't pay enough attention to one aspect, which is tourism, and blaming big government is not really the answer, but rather the fact that we have not gone into the markets where we need to go in order to improve our tourist intake into the territory to match our growing government, which we need for financial services, being that government is a major distributor of a major intaker of revenue and a major distributor of revenue. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to deal with that particular issue right after these words. Keep it locked right there to Spotlight.
Spotlight is brought to you by Bolo's High-Tech Printery, Virgin Island Motors, and Clarence Thomas Limited.
Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm going to go right to you, Dana. You know, one of my concerns has always been these economic theories that we adopt from the international community with large populations and many and multi-dimensional economies with all kinds of products they sell. We got two products, 30,000 people. We need, and most of the revenue coming into government. Do we need a smaller government, or do we need greater economic growth? Should tourism be more advanced at this stage, or should we cut back?
Well, your tourism product, from what I have observed, you're looking at small business, you're looking at hoteliers, you're looking at those type of enterprises. So when we talk about the government outpacing the economy and we single out tourism, you have to remember that that is a sector that has become much more competitive than it would have been before. Not necessarily that the BVI does not have a good product, but you just have different circumstances and different situations coming in to play in the market. And when I say the market, I mean the international market. And so to maintain a sustainable or consistent level of tourists coming and enjoying the BVI product, there has to be certain things put in place from the government standpoint, but there also has to be an understanding from the private sector or the hotels, the enterprises, that this is their industry and they must play a significant role. So I would suggest that a greater emphasis needs to be made with setting up or establishing public-private partnerships and seeing how all of the players in that particular sector or industry can come together and see how they can work together to bring the tourism product back up to the level, or back up to a level that it is respectable and that contributes and makes everybody win from the entire situation.
Big business or more economic growth? A big government or more economic growth? Isn't it our fault that we have not taken advantage of the opportunities presented in other markets, say the Asian market, for example? We've waited, it's 8 years now. We have, in where it's everybody's cashing in on the 100 million tourists coming from Asia, and we are still lagging behind and talking about our government is too big when we should be looking at markets that have money to spend.
Well, it doesn't matter. Any way you slice it, it's going to be our responsibility. And the point you made earlier about whether or not the government is big because the industry requires them to be big, it doesn't make a difference. As long as you are spending more money than you're making, you know that the time will come when that is not possible. It's not sustainable. And it is their responsibility, if you are not bringing in the economic, the revenue, to pull back the spending, pull back the size that government is expanding. Because the question would be, why are you expanding government then if the goal that you're saying you're trying to set is not being achieved? If you are saying that you're expanding government because it has to grow and financial services grow, it has to grow and tourism is growing, but tourism isn't growing, then why are you continuing to expand as if tourism was growing? Why are you spending, as if that was happening? So, something has to change. He made two direct calls. One, he said, was in the Premier's budget, is that we have to increase economic growth. So he said that up front. That would actually be the ideal solution. He still wants to make sure government is efficient, and that's the reason why obviously they're doing a retreat. But he's saying that we have to improve economic growth. If that can't happen, if we're stuck in a recession or we're not innovative, which is real interesting that he used those words.
Yes.
Innovative and
imaginative.
Mm-hmm. If we cannot figure out in our tourism product, mentally, what can we do to excite the tourists? Or how can we solve the problem of getting our tourists to our destination to show off our beautiful islands? If we can't find, if the new tourism model requires that we have more activities, and we can't find what those activities are, we don't have the imagination to continue to develop our tourism. Dana made a good example of the fact that a lot of other Caribbean countries have actually improved their product. So it may be that our product is exactly like it was 10 years ago, but everybody has caught up. Everybody is offering a set of new innovative ideas, and the question is, are we thinking? Are we innovative? Are we imaginative? Can we captivate the attention of the traveler?
He's suggesting in his statement that the reason why we are not imaginative or not innovative anymore is because we become so reliant on government spending and government handouts and feeding at the public trough. And I think and further down in the statement, which we didn't play, he talked about government becoming the only trick in town.
Yes. And
that's a very serious statement. But it seems to me that a fundamental it's almost like an attack on government inability to manage the civil service. And when I separate government from the civil service, I'm talking about elected representatives not being hamstrung when regarding getting efficiency and effectiveness out of the civil servants. So we have duplication, we have waste, we have low productivity, we have tardiness.
But there's a good argument that tardiness is pervasive not only in the civil service, but it's pervasive throughout the entire society, because he's saying that government is where everybody wants to work to a great extent. We aren't imaginative. We're not creating any new concepts and any new things for our tourism product. We're probably still innovating when it comes to continuing to evolve the financial services product. But he's identifying that these things are pervasive throughout the BVI.
But in the private sector, where we are working in the private sector seems to be getting the productivity that they need for them to be successful, particularly in the financial services sector and in certain aspects of the tourism industry as well. It seems like only government has this management challenge.
Well, you have to understand, but by design, governments traditionally are not really set up to be profit-making enterprises. They are set up to maintain standard of living, quality of life, and to a good sense, give direction to the other sectors in guiding the economy. The private sector now, they are set up to make profit, so they do whatever it takes to protect that bottom line. It therefore means that whatever they have to do to protect that bottom line, whether it is become more innovative through technology, become more efficient by asking their employees to pay interest and to be efficient. So you have to understand that what has happened, however, since the financial crisis is that governments across the world have had to change their direction and perspective, because they have recognized that that traditional model is not working, and it is putting their economies to become very vulnerable to financial crisis and things of that nature.
We got to get more. We got to get more out of the government, out of civil service.
Yes,
I agree, but the issue here seems to me to be that even though government is maybe not set up to turn a profit, somebody has to pay attention to how we innovate, whether we are competitive. And in the financial services industry, that industry really is on the cutting edge, and we've led that industry for a number of years. Even though that industry has become very competitive, a number of new players have gotten the industry, and the Bureau has been able to maintain its position. But when it comes to tourism, there are some infrastructural things that we did not do over the last 10 years. One is make sure that we can get tourists to our destination in a short time. We know that that's something that nobody wants an 8-hour flight. To get to the BVI, it's more than 12 hours from our key markets. We know that that's a significant problem. And there is the obvious trend that the baby boomers who we've depended on have aged. Most of them is now either over 60 or 70 years. And the younger generation needs more activities. It's not that they're running away from our beaches or they don't want the pristine. It's just that they want to have a great time on the beach as well. So we have to be very innovative in terms of whether it's music and entertainment constantly, limbo competitions. The full moon parties are great, but they happen maybe once a month. Foxy's have been very successful with their New Year's Eve parties. People talk about how great the experience is, but that happens once a year. We have the music festival, and we have our August festival. But we do not have activities-driven cultural experience to sustain our tourism product that will make it memorable. Constantly, that we can rely on. If I want to go someplace tonight and hear steel pan music and watch the Mokujumbis perform or have a barbecue or fish fry, where do I do that right now? And the other countries in the Caribbean have realized that they have to create this Caribbean experience that excites their modern guests, and that goes along with high-speed internet and broadband facilities within their rooms so they can stay connected, and all these types of things.
Are we in a catch-22 right now, where we don't have the money because the economy is not growing as fast as it needs to grow to keep up with our spending, but yet we need to improve our infrastructure, and we need to develop activities in the tourism industry?
Let me say this quickly, and this is the point that to me is a key at what Neil Smith is saying. If we don't have the money, we have to cut back on what our spending is within government and decide to use the money that we save to build out that infrastructural competitiveness and that new infrastructure going forward. I think some of that is being attempted by the government to do the cruise ship dock or to do the airport or to do some of the infrastructural things that we need. But the innovative ideas, that creativity that will drive our new tourism product, that is still left to be seen, whether or not the government can facilitate this discussion, a good partnership between government, the private businesses, and the civil service.
One of the popular strategies that are put into place within growing economies now is what you call a think tank. And and this is the opportune time to sit down with all the stakeholders involved, all the persons involved within your tourism product, and say, look, we're going to be embarking on these two major projects, but we need to have support. We need to have the innovation. We need to have the creativity, the ideas as to how to keep people coming. Because you could put up a large airport, you could put up a wonderful port, but it doesn't mean that people are going to just come for the airport or the port. So there has to be other things that can make the trip memorable. And what you want to also take into consideration too is that you want to have not just people come once, but people wanting to come over and over again, repeat visitors. So it means that your product has to be outstanding and so memorable that people will say, well, when we get a chance, we're going to come. We may not come the next year or the third year, but they have it in mind that they will be coming back. All right, so those are the things that you have to look at. And I would also want to say too that just the ambiance of the place says a lot too, and so it means that how you keep the community, how you keep the surroundings. A lot of tourists are into that kind of thinking now. Is this country environmentally conscious? And there were news clips about that today in terms of keeping the city clean and keeping it colorful and picturesque, and so that the people will be invited or welcome to come. You don't have to be welcomed by hearing somebody say welcome by just seeing the place. It has to be something that stands out and means something to that individual.
I think apart from what you're saying, there is an underlying thing that I think something we miss in the environmental consciousness. We talk about keeping the place clean, we talk about preserving our environment, but the cultural aspect can go side and side with this environmental preservation. When people travel, they want to feel your culture, they want to taste it, they want to eat it, they want to, feel like this is the reason why I've come to the Caribbean, or this is the reason why I've come to the Virgin Islands, because I'm feeling the beauty. It's not nasty, it's nice and pristine, but I'm also embracing that cultural experience that for some reason we have not been able to develop a tourism product really strong that's based on that cultural experience around food and entertainment and all that kind of stuff. We've done it in some form, but in this era we have to make sure that it is exciting and make sure that it is competitive to what the other region is offering, and I think that's something that we're really going to have to be strategic when it comes to the school system, when it comes to what we're doing as a people to tackle.
I'm afraid that's all we got time for. I mean, it's like we could go on with this discussion. We have to have this continued discussion again. But certainly, there's a lot for us to do. I think the financial secretary sounded the alarm. He's given us a lot of food for thought. All hands need to be on deck, and as people of the Virgin Islands, we have to really start focusing on what we need to do to maintain our present quality of life. As he said, it could certainly slip away from us. Thank you, Dana, for being my guest on Spotlight. And of course, thank you, Troy, and I hope to see you guys again in subsequent discussions. We're going to take a break, but I want to remind you that we're going to talk about the impact of the NGO Act, the nonprofit, the NPO, the Nonprofit Organization Act that has been passed a few weeks ago, and we want to talk about the impact of that act on volunteerism, on philanthropy, on the organizations themselves that have to give out these services. We're going to have coming up next Ms. Carolyn Igwe, Ms. Vereen Vanterpool, and Mr. Errol George. So you keep it locked right here to Spotlight. We're going to be right back after these brief words from our sponsors.
This program is sponsored by the law firm of J.S. Archibald & Co. and by the trust company J.S. Archibald Trust Services Limited, both of Rotown, Tortola, BVI.
Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm here with my three guests, Ms. Carolyn Stout-Igwe. She's Deputy Secretary in the Ministry of Health and Social Development. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Ms. Gov'T Npo, the Principal Crown Counsel in the Attorney General's Chambers. Welcome, Gov'T. And Mr. Errol George, Director of Financial Investigations in the Financial Services sector. And we're talking about the new legislation, the Nonprofit Organization Act 2012. And I just want to do a little background for people who may not know what a nonprofit organization is. Maybe you could just give us a little brief synopsis of what that is, what is called a nonprofit organization.
I will give you the definition that's in the Act, and then I can give you some examples. Based on the Act, it defines a nonprofit organization as a body of persons, whether incorporated or unincorporated, established solely or primarily for the promotion of charitable, religious, cultural, educational, social, or fraternal purposes, or other activities or programs for the benefit of the public or a section of the public, and which raises or disperses funds in pursuance of its objectives primarily within the territory. So some examples I can give would be churches, which would be come under the religious aspect. We have a number of sporting organizations. We have also a number of country associations like the Jamaican Association or Dominican Association. And then of course you have the service clubs like Rotary Club and Lions Club and Road Track, Leo.
All of those.
Those will fall under the definition of a NPO.
Okay. Do nonprofits have any special privileges when it comes to relationship to government in the community, like tax breaks? In other jurisdictions in other countries, nonprofits don't pay taxes. People who contribute to them get tax breaks. They have like special incentives that they give to the population who donate to them. Do we have any of those things here? Maybe that's
at the moment, the Act doesn't make provision for such allowances. That may, in fact, be the subject of another discussion at some point. But at the moment, no special exemptions or allowances, tax breaks specifically are allowed for nonprofit organizations at this time. The focus of this Act is primarily just regulatory, more so to get all nonprofit organizations registered, to have them functioning with certain rules, which I'm sure we will get into, and just to ensure that there is a proper record of the NPOs operating in the territory, and to ensure that all our NPOs are doing the same thing when it comes to record keeping, particularly record keeping relating to their finances. So that is the crust of the Act that we have here.
And all the NPOs are saying, we are going along so good, doing our thing and helping the community, and now you're saddling us with all of this paperwork, and we got to put in all kind of organizational structure. Did you come up with this idea?
No, not me by myself, but I would say, in addition to what Ms. Igwe would add in, that one of the main reasons why we have the Nonprofit Organizations Act coming into force at this time has largely to do with the territory's obligations under FATF and CFATF. To break that down, the Financial Action Task Force, which is a global institution that is responsible for monitoring various countries' money laundering and anti-terrorist financing regimes. The regional body would be CFATF, which is the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. Now, with recent recommendations from those bodies, one of the concerns that they have had would be to minimize the risk of money laundering or terrorist financing activities perhaps being conducted through NPOs. Any organization that handles money, we want to be sure that there is a structure in place that eliminates the risk of money laundering or terrorist financing through those organizations. And so that is perhaps one of the core reasons why the Act is in place. So it does provide for again, we'll go through it a little later. It provides in large part for record keeping and managing transactions and identifying the identities of persons that do business with your NPOs. And the focus of it, again, is understanding what the organizations are doing and making sure that there is proper record keeping for their transactions at all times. So yes, it's important for us to know what's happening because we have international obligations.
Right. Then just to add to what Ms. Van Npo said, these organizations, they already have some type of record keeping procedures in place. But it's just now that since the Act came into force, it's now they're required to comply with the provisions of the Act, which among other things is to like Ms. Van Npo said, to keep proper records, to so that they can at all times they're in a position to say okay, to identify the sources of their donations, and in addition to that, identify how the monies that they collected, were expended or used for whatever purposes based on the goals of the organizations.
Okay. If I might just add one simple thing. The Ministry of Health and Social Development, under the Minister's portfolio, is voluntary organizations. But if you were to come to the ministry today and ask us, can you produce a list of these organizations that we have in the territory? We cannot, because there was nothing in place to require them to be registered. So we are hoping that, and sometimes we do get requests for a list of different organizations, but we can't produce them because there was no mechanism in place to require them to be registered. So we are hoping now, because there's a registration process, that we would also be able to have better statistics and better information of what is going on in the country.
Okay, so it sounds to me like this process is a result of the international community's concern about terrorism and money laundering.
Yes, and I might add that the BVI is only among 180 countries that are governed by the FATF recommendations, so we're not alone in what we're doing.
Okay. Now I know we've probably been talking around it, but so that it's clear and focused, and you talked about the rules, Ms. Van Npo, is there a list that we can go through for the viewing audience in terms of what their requirements are, and what if they haven't put these measures in place already, these are the measures they need to put in place in their organization to comply with the Act?
Okay, I can add to that. First of all, the Act came into effect on January 1st, 2013. So the Act requires that within 90 days, all existing nonprofit organizations in the territory should be registered.
And they go where to register?
So they say to the Ministry of Health and Social Development. This takes us down to April 2nd. So between now and April 2nd, they can come to the ministry at any time to be registered. We do have registration forms available on the sister islands from the district offices. We have forms available at the help desk. We have forms available at the Ministry of Health and Social Development. We have forms available online. Okay, basically at this point in time, for new registration for the existing applications, the form is about 11 pages long, but for now they are only required to complete sections 1, 2, and 3. Section 1 deals with the basic contact details of the organization: your telephone, your cell phone, email address, website, and basically a contact person. Section 2 talks about your operating details. You're required to state your mission statement and your vision statement. I don't think those are hard requirements because you should have some idea as to why you exist, where you intend to be going. Then we go on to describing the type of activities that you do as an NPO. And then we have some questions basically that ask whether your organization is incorporated and if you have any subsidiary organizations. The example that is provided in the Act is like the Methodist Church would have maybe like the Girls Brigade as a subsidiary organization. So they would list that information on those subsidiary organizations. And then you have some questions, basic questions about how many members you have, how many adults, and then you're required to produce a copy of your constitution. And you're also required to produce information on the members of your executive body, like your president, your vice president, secretary, treasurer. And then there's some basic expenditure information simply like when does your financial year end, if there's an annual membership fee, and some to outline some operational costs for us. So it's only sections 1, 2, and 3 that are required at this stage, and at the end of the year, when you're filing your returns now, that is when you will complete the entire form.
Okay, and the only thing you have to bring is the physical document is
The constitution of the organization, and people need not get scared about the constitution thinking like it's the Virgin Islands Constitution order. A constitution doesn't have to be such a big document. It just basically setting out some basic information about the organization. So, and again, for those, there are a number of NPOs that have been incorporated through the Registry of Corporate Affairs. So they would have already had the articles of incorporation and those documents already. So,
do you have to show that you have a real organization with some people in it, some structure? How much of that is, and how important, how much of that do you have to show and how important that is?
well, the officers, you'll need to list the officers.
Suppose I don't have officers. I mean, I don't know if the island, what I call the islands, non-profit organizations like the Division organization, the Jamaican organization, they have
Presidents and secretaries and
so
stuff.
you have to list those things.
Yes.
And you're required to have that structure if you're going to be allowed to be registered.
Right.
Okay.
But it may be that some people have combination, because we've already been told that some people might not have a treasurer and a secretary separate, they might have combined. So basically you're providing based on what you have.
Because these are all volunteers, and they're wearing many hats, and they all have good intentions, but and a lot of them might not even know what an organization structure is.
So this is to help them.
Okay.
Well, I was just going to ask if you were referring to certain organizations that may actually only have one person, and they do everything. The concept is theirs, the mission they undertake is theirs, and it's all around one person show. Yes, they're still required to register and indicate what they're doing, the finances that they handle, and the same requirements would be required of them, notwithstanding that it may just be one person doing nearly everything.
You have help for persons who come to register to get assistance in the registration process?
Yes, sir. We do. We have the registrar. The registrar is stationed in the Ministry of Health and Social Development. And we basically have an implementation team at the ministry ready to assist. And as we move around, next week we're going to be at the Agricultural Fair and Anigada and Just Van Dyke. Amaze them to answer any questions and provide any assistance as well. So we're going to be out there, and we have people who are willing and able. Some persons have already come by, made appointments to come by and ask questions. We had a meeting 2 weeks ago at the Sorbonne by Kefal. Some persons asked questions there as well. And we have been fielding a number of emails over the past, since January 1st actually, answering questions from people. Okay. So we are available.
Anyone wants to ask a question now can certainly do so. The telephone number is going to come up on the screen. You could either call or you could send us a text. We'll be happy to answer all your questions. So look at the screen and see the telephone number and the text number, and give us a call or send us a text. There's any other things in the Act that we need to know? Because I don't quite know what questions to ask about the Act. Have not seen it and have not been a part of a non-profit organization.
Okay.
What are some of the other things that we need to know? We went through the registration process.
The role of the board, I can talk about the role of the board, and then I can let Mr. George talk about the role of the Financial Investigation Agency, because they have the monitoring and supervisory role, and then the board is the one. We have a board that has been appointed since January 1st. Mr. Kenneth Hodge is the chairman. We have Kamika Forbes as a deputy chairman, Ms. Claudia Hodge, Mr. Cornell Foy, and the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Health, as well as the registrar both in the Ministry of Health.
So there's a governing board set up to administer non-profit organizations.
Right, and I can go through the functions of the board.
Okay, so we're going to take a break and we're going to go through the functions of the board when we come back. Also, of course, we're going to need to know what the penalties are for non-compliance. And I'm sure Mr. George is over there ready to tell us what those are. So we're going to take a break for a word from our sponsors. I think I got a text just came in. When we come back, we're going to deal with you on the phones and on the text. And we're going to continue that discussion about the Nonprofit Organization Act 2012. Keep it locked right there, the Spotlight.
Spotlight is brought to you by Tortola Concrete Limited and CCT Global Communications.
Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm here with Deputy Secretary, Ms. Igwe, Carolyn Igwe, in the Ministry of Health and Social Development, and Attorney at Law, Ms. Vereen Vanterpool, Principal at Crown Counsel in the Attorney General's Chambers, and Mr. Errol George, who's the Director of Investigations in the Financial Services Sector. Let's take a phone call while we have one. Thank you very much for calling Spotlight. Go right ahead, please.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes. Are political parties supposed to register as well under the Nonprofit Organization Act?
That's a good question. Political parties, are they non-profit? I don't know. I guess they should.
Promotion of charitable, religious, cultural, educational, social,
Or other activities or programs for the benefit of the public or section of the public. It would seem as if they could be covered by the definition of nonprofit organization. The political aspect of the group has not been identified specifically, but once they are in fact collecting monies for the benefit of the public or a section of the public and raising or dispersing funds, yes, they could very likely be covered here.
Carla?
Thank you. And I have one more question too. Now, are the groups such as the Festival Committee and others that raise money for, different events, I think this is something culturally, are they required also to register and also to file the forms?
Festival Committee.
The Festival and Affairs Committee?
Yeah, that would come under the cultural, promotion of cultural, educational, for the benefit of public or section of the public.
Prima facie, yes. I'm hesitating because there's a governmental element to that organization, Festival and Fairs Committee specifically. There's an act governing that organization. I am not sure about that one because the act does not actually directly, it doesn't involve government organizations, but I'll have to check and get back to you on that one.
It doesn't exclude them.
It doesn't?
I know sometimes in some of these things that people are asking for financial reports, and the other organizations are now required, to do such and to give financial information. So I just wanted to see if it was broad sweeping or if there was some exclusion.
We can do some research.
It's a very good question, and we thank you for asking. There are a number of committees that would be fundraising around festival time. Generally, I think the answer that I should be giving you is yes. But the Festival and Fairs Committee specifically...
I just gave them as an example because there are a number of, committees that spring up to do some particular activities during the year.
Right.
If it's a one-off thing, it's not.
Right. Okay.
All right, thank you very much for that call. Very good questions.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very good questions. I have a text. It says, yes, you have to check that out.
Yes.
Yeah. The government, usually the government has been exempt over the years from many things. So you have to try to get them in the loop as well, right? We have hold the government accountable under the law.
They are exempt.
How would you know if a non-profit organization has been registered?
Okay, the law requires that a list of nonprofit organizations be published annually. The board had its first meeting and we plan to publish a list by the end of June, because by that time we figure if we would have given enough time for the applications to be processed. So the applications are required by law, the lists of nonprofit organizations that are registered are required to be published annually in the Gazette as well as in one newspaper in the territory. So the list will be published again, as well as the law makes provision for the register to be open for the public to view. So in the next couple of months we will be making an announcement as to when the register is open, but it is available for public inspection.
I think this text means, though, I have my own little secret charity that a nonprofit organization that I'm working with, and I'm going around collecting money, and I'm not complying with none of this stuff y'all talking about. I haven't been registered, and I'm just doing my own thing, and I ain't planning to register either because I don't want y'all to know what I'm doing with the money.
Okay.
So how are you going to know that?
Okay, well, we have been asking for the cooperation, for example, of government agencies. If a nonprofit organization approaches you, to check with us to make sure it's registered. And we would also like to enlighten the public that NPOs are required to be registered. So for businesses, when they approach you for funds or anything requesting funds, check to make sure that they are registered. They're actually given a certificate of registration.
Okay.
They're actually given a certificate of registration with their own number, so you can request that from them to verify that they are in fact registered, or you can check with the Ministry of Health and Social Development to verify that these NPOs are actually registered.
And Brother George, what you going to do if you come across some people that have a nonprofit organization or any organization that's not registered? What are the penalties for non-compliance?
Well, there is a penalty, for persons carrying on the business of a nonprofit organization that is not registered as is required, by the Act. And I think that penalty is somewhere within the range of $10,000. If someone or a group of persons or an organization is operating or found to be operating as a nonprofit organization but are not registered as they're legally required to.
Okay, so a $10,000 penalty, and if you can't pay, I guess you go to jail.
Well, I mean, it's usually if you can't pay, that's the idea. You either pay the sum or you can be. You can be subject to a custodial sentence.
And
we were talking about the board's role. Okay. Yes.
The role of the board. The board receives and determines the applications for registration by nonprofit organizations. So the applications are submitted to the Ministry of Health, but basically the registrar is responsible for processing those applications and submitting them to the board. And the board is the one that registers the NPOs. The board receives and reviews financial statements and reports from the organizations. And basically they're there to monitor what's going on in the sector in terms of making recommendations to the minister as they see necessary, and any complaints arising as a result of the Act, they're also supposed to receive and investigate those.
Okay, so every year the nonprofit organization is required to renew the registration, so it's an annual registration.
Yes.
And a part of that annual registration process is what?
The annual registration process is completing the form in its entirety, and you're required to submit reports on the funds that you've distributed throughout the year, funds that were received through donations, and funds that were raised through donations.
So you have to produce an annual report now to be renewed?
Yes. And I might add that in terms of donations, there's a $10,000. If any NPO has received $10,000, whether as a single donation or cumulatively for the year, that they're required to list the date of those donations and the persons who gave, the name of the donors, as well as the purpose for that donation.
Are you required to list the names of all donors?
No, only those over $10,000.
So I could give an organization $9,000 and You don't have to know my name.
Yes, based on what's here.
Okay.
But you are required to give financial statements. If the NPO, if they make over $250,000 a year, they're required to submit certified financial statements. Those that receive under $250,000, the board is going to devise a reporting form for those NPOs.
Okay. What about the school? Let me see. What about school children that ask for sponsorship for school functions?
Are the school children a part of the question would be whether the school children are part of an organization?
Well, a lot of times school children come and they say, I'm from Elmore Style High School and we going on a trip and we need some funds to pay the airfare and to pay the hotel. Can you give me a couple of dollars, please? And usually we take out $5 and then give it to them, and we write it down on our name on a sponsor sheet. Yeah.
Sponsor sheets are different.
Is that
I think the general idea is that where you have an organization that's doing work on a continuous basis, as opposed to just like the example you use where maybe class 2 students they want to go on a field trip and they're just coming together on this one occasion to maybe do a bake sale or sell water by the side of the road or something like that. I really don't see any requirements for that them to be groups such as that to be actually registered, but if it's something on an ongoing basis.
And I think we ought to clarify and reiterate the international necessity for compliance with this act. Because it's, I think, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, that it's focused primarily on monitoring money laundering and specifically terrorism financing. That is like really the key to this whole.
It's focused on ensuring that transactions are recorded. For example, in the example you just gave about a person donating $9,000 if they're required to disclose that. That donation wouldn't necessarily have to go on the annual report upon re-registration or renewal, but the record of that transaction should be kept with the organization, and records are required to be kept up to 5 years of a transaction occurring. So the crux, if I can put it that way again, would be the record keeping, particularly record keeping dealing with transactions of a financial nature. And again, to add to what Mr. Jaws said, the Act again isn't so much interested in the one-off activity, but if you are organized to have a particular activity regularly, for instance, if you are set up to have a fish fry every Saturday, and that is going to be your means of collecting funds, then yes, you need to be registered, and your activity of a fish fry would be recorded as your main activity for bringing in funds, etc. So the transaction and seeing the transactions of the organization would be the overall objective. Seeing and identifying who is involved, etc.
And just to reiterate something that you a question that you asked about it being an international requirement. The truth is that certain risks have been identified where non-profit organizations can be used, for terrorist financing purposes. And I think that risk is even greater where you have a local non-profit organization might be perhaps sending money overseas, to another non-profit organization or a group of persons that who might be claiming to be a non-profit organization overseas, and where in fact it's possible that that group overseas could in fact be a terrorist organization, and if they receive that money that is sent from the local non-profit organization, that group overseas in turn can use that money to fund some acts of terrorism overseas. So I think that is one of the main ideas in terms of why the legislation came into being, and why it's an international requirement for non-profit organizations to be properly supervised and monitored.
If churches are not currently paying taxes, would they be in violation of the NGO Act or the NPO Act, as the Act does not provide for exemptions? Is that an accurate statement in the question?
The pastors won't pay taxes on their income.
The issue of paying tax or not paying tax doesn't really have much bearing on the requirements on the church now under this act. Under this act, the requirement is to be registered and to comply with the general record keeping requirements that the act prescribes. So there would be no issue concerning payment of tax relative to how they deal
That's a
with
different
this
issue, a different department.
Different thing altogether, yes.
Okay. Okay, let me see. I think all monies received should be recorded, not just up $10,000. We don't want money under the table because every bit received adds up. So yes, I give you 9,000 here, 9,000 here, 9,000. I'm under the radar.
Yeah.
I mean, I do it when I go to the bank all the time.
Right.
If you give 9,000 over the course, if you give 9,000 every month, you mean?
Well, if you make a deposit or you give $9,000 this month, and then maybe 2 months later you give another 9,000.
That will have to be recorded because it would have been over 10,000 for the duration of the year.
Oh, okay.
So whether it's a single donation or cumulatively, all right. But at the same time, the organization is still required to keep records. It's just that certain things are required to be spelled out on the form, but you're gonna still be required to keep all your financial records.
Okay, right. So you close that. For those of us who think that we're gonna use that loophole, we need to think again, right?
Right. And as we mentioned before, I'm sure that the majority of the organizations who are currently operating as non-profit organization, they must keep some sort of financial records. I mean, basically to show what monies they collected and so forth.
It must be a tall order though to have those records reviewed. I mean, when I come for my annual renewal for my non-profit organization, and I bring my financial statements, my financial report, it has to go through a review process. The board reviews it.
The board will review the information.
And so then the re-registration must take quite some time.
Yeah, well, we will know that next year, but we know that the registration process is going to be it might be a little bit time consuming, but the law gives the board 30 working days within which to process the application. So there is some time that is allowed for them to review and look over and see that they're compliant and stuff. So there is sufficient time for the board to review. And then because it's a new act, you're going to have to just make adjustments as you go along in terms of maybe making recommendations next year when you see how things are going, that maybe there might be changes that you would need to recommend. But right now they have 30 working days, so that is at least a month and a half.
Okay. Now, if I have applied for registration short of 30 working days, say 15 working days before my expiration date, am I still registered? Should I make sure that I have applied for re-registration well in advance of my expiration date?
I think I will have to refer to the section, but I think that there is provision that once you've applied for renewal, once the board is reviewing, that you'll continue to operate. But that's 30 working days for the board to process, so you will still have sufficient time. But I think I will have to refer to the section, but I think it might be a month. There's a time frame given within which you need to submit your renewal.
Okay. So if I have applied and my registration has expired, I will be counted among the non-registered for that period.
Not as yet. There's a little process before you even get deregistered. But I should have said that the certificate of registration is valid for 1 year from the date of issue, not by the calendar year, like everything is expired December 31st. It's for 1 calendar year.
Okay. It almost sounds like NPOs are criminals. It's easier to have a business than an NPO.
I think I would
You disagree with that, right?
I would disagree with that.
Because the risks, I guess, that are out there for NPOs is not the same as businesses.
And I think it adds value in terms of the reputation of the NPO, because if you have someone who have a considerable sum that they would like to to give to a particular NPO as a donation, and see that, and that they would want to make sure that one, the NPO is registered, and one, it is it has some formal structure in place to make them comfortable that yes, they can part with their money.
Yeah. But I mean, but businesses have more stringent record keeping systems than an NPO, because you can't deposit more than $5,000 in a bank without making sure that a form is filled out and where you got that from is justified. You have to justify that. I mean, you could deposit less, but you still have to keep the record. So I think.
And I also needed to add, because I was speaking to somebody who works in a trust company a couple of weeks ago, who said that there are a number of organizations out there that want to give to charities, that want to give to NPOs, but they're not willing to do so unless there's some regulation in place. They want to make sure that they're being monitored, that there's a registration process. People are not just going to give them money just like that. They want to make sure that there's some structure in place. If they have a question to ask, that they can ask somebody. So there is some money out there on the positive side waiting to be had. We just need to get registered so we can tap into a lot of those sources out there.
We filed an attorney clock. Is there anything that we need to get out there that I've neglected to ask?
Just to stress the registration period, April 2nd. Everybody, don't wait until March 30th. April 1st is a holiday. Some persons have already started to come in to bring in their forms. We encourage persons to come in. If you have a question, give us a call to the Ministry of Health. We'll be out there in different farms over the next couple months, but we're encouraging people to comply with the registration process.
You got any community events coming up to discuss these issues?
Well, actually, over the next 8 to 12 weeks, the Financial Investigation Agency will be organizing a series of workshops, and we'll put that information out there where these workshops will actually be focusing on sensitizing the NPOs about the risk and so forth that is associated with the organization and the possibility that they could be used for terrorist financing purposes, and just to raise general awareness and to let them know exactly what some of their obligations are under the Act apart from the registration.
We know that the sister islands have been calling. So Virgin Gorda, we are going to be in Virgin Gorda on Wednesday, February 13th with a public meeting, just like we did in Tortola. And next week, Monday, we're going to be in Anegada at the Agricultural Fair to provide information, as well as on Just Van Dyke on Tuesday to provide information as well.
Okay. Ms. Igwe, Ms. Vanderpool, Mr. Josh, thank you very much for being my guest on Spotlight. It was a pleasure having you, and I hope you're able to enlighten the public about the NPO Act 2012. Thanks for being my guest.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. Next month is African Descendants History Month, and I'm not saying African American Black history, none of that stuff. It's African descendants because we're relegated to color now. So I think we need to talk about who we truly are. So next month is African Descendants History Month. Teacher Jenny Wheatley is going to be here. She'll be under the spotlight. We're going to be talking about history, morals, and values of the Virgin Islands culture. It's going to be different. It's going to be a whole set of information, like saving yourself for marriage and making sure you get your education before you go looking for a wife, and having a place to put up before you go to her parents' house, and having to write into the parents and telling your neighbors good morning and helping each other in need. It's a whole different culture that we don't talk about. We talk about history of boat building. We talk about baking cassava bread and all that kind of stuff, but we don't talk about the morals and the values that we should have transferred to our children, and we didn't. So it's going to be really, really important. So make sure you check us out next week. Don't miss it. This Sunday coming up, February 3rd, all are invited to attend the annual wreath laying ceremony at the cruise pier at 3 p.m. in memory and honor of our ancestors who died in the transatlantic slave trade. Yes, we need to honor those persons, and we also need to honor those who died during the plantation era as well. There were a lot of hangings, lynchings, and all kinds of things that were going on back then that we need to remember those persons on whose shoulder we stand. Thank you for watching. Thanks for your words of encouragement. send me your suggestions and your criticisms to jtvspotlight@yahoo.com. Don't forget, Spotlight is rebroadcast every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. or you can view Spotlight on the internet at jtvlive.net. I'm Edgerenka reminding you that when the Spotlight is on, you see the facts. Peace and blessings.
This program is sponsored by the law firm of J.S. Archibald & Co. and by the trust company J.S. Archibald Trust Services Limited, both of Rotown, Tortola, BVI.